doctor. You call the doctor, talk to the doctor about, I'm supposed to get a quarterly checkup because of whatever health condition I have. Should I come in to see you? Could we do telehealth? Do we do separate blood work? Discuss how ongoing healthcare is provided. The preference, of course, for people who are in an ICF is that they continue to do telehealth. But that is a decision for the healthcare professional who is caring for them, either for that routine appointment or to monitor whatever chronic health condition they have. One other note about people going, I don't know if it's here because I want to make sure that I speak to it. When they talk about activities in the group home or in the ICF and, recreational activities and leaving the ICF, it is essential that people get up and out and move around. To get out in the sunshine, to the extent possible, engage in some physical activity, to move around. There are serious health consequences from immobility. And it is really essential that people continue, shutting someone inside to prevent them from getting COVID keeps them from getting COVID. Having a person not have the ability to exercise, to move around, to get the kind of regular care they need, regular hydration, good diet, all of that causes a whole host of other physical problems. So we need to be making sure that people are taking care of themselves, not just not getting COVID, but taking good care of themselves generally as well. There's real concern in their guidance about non-essential medical providers coming into the facility or leaving to go to these appointments. There's a lot of guidance about going to personal care appointments, manicure, haircut appointment, how those could be accomplished. And as I said, what I think is most helpful in each of these is at the end, they identify what the risks are of engaging in the different activities, which really gives you guidance about how you could minimize or mitigate those risks. One item of some concern is there is a recommendation / directive that all staff who interact directly with people who live in ICFs should be tested weekly. That is a heavy lift, I believe. And so I've asked DC Health for some assistance in how can we figure out how that would be done, because we're talking here about more than 1,000 people at more than 50 different locations having to get a test every single week. DC Health is they advised me this week that at the DC Health testing sites, the average response time for test results is 3 days. So that has, by their report, that has improved. But there's also just the logistical issue of being able to have that many people get tested on that frequent a basis. And that may be an issue that could be discussed when the providers have their meeting with DC Health this afternoon. They're going to be talking about infection control, but certainly this question of testing is certainly part of infection control. Another part of it that I do not see in this guidance necessarily, but that has come up recently, and I did ask that DC Health address it just briefly, at least when they speak with providers this afternoon, and we should talk more about it, is In one of our recent outbreaks, I saw a term that was a new term to me from DC Health, which expressed concern about what they called presenteeism as opposed to absenteeism, meaning people who were coming to work who should not be at work. And there are provisions, we have the universal paid leave in the district. We include a benefits factor in our pay, or there are benefits available through the ICF rate as well as through the waiver rate. And CARES Act included funding for people to be able to pay for leave for people to prevent this kind of practice. Screening staff when they come to work and screening visitors is essential in keeping people safe. But staff have to be responsible for that as well, and disclose if they're concerned that they have had contact with a person who's been diagnosed with COVID, so that they stay out of work, or if they are not feeling well, to be honest about that, not just hope that their temperature will be down when they arrive at work so that they're able to work. Um, you know, we want to ensure that staff are healthy, taking care of themselves, and not being put in a position where they feel torn between, do I get paid, or and place people at risk, or do I not go to work and have no income? There is also a section on PPE for staff, and this section in our training this afternoon by DC Health, they'll go over that in detail. So, what I think is this guidance, by the way, is available on our website. It is also available on coronavirus.dc.gov's website. To me, the most important takeaway from this guidance is what I've said frequently. It's still early. It feels a long time since we started the stay-at-home order in the middle of March, but we are still a very long time from being out of the woods on this, and it is essential that people continue to be vigilant in um, in, in their practices to care for their own health and to prevent any transmission to other people. So that's all I have on that. Briefly, I would like to talk about as well. So providers have begun to submit their day program reopening plans. And so those are being reviewed right now. We've received, Kirk could perhaps type in how many, but we've received a number of them and we're beginning to review them. Once we have a day program reopening plan, we can then begin scheduling the IDT meetings for people. What we will be doing is, in any instance where a person has employment readiness as a service pre-COVID, a VR counselor will be invited to that IDT meeting. Now, let me make a few points about this. One is, keep in mind that under the waiver, there was a 2-year limit for employment readiness. And that's 2 waiver years for the person. So, it wasn't effective November 2019 was the end for people, but the 2 years started counting down from the first ISP the person had after November of 2017, if I'm not mistaken. So there may be people who have already exhausted their employment readiness options, and uh, we're doing job readiness through RSA in the place of employment readiness. So if the person is not eligible for employment readiness, they need to look at what the other options are beyond employment readiness. Um, they don't just shift over to VR services. Any of our providers who had an existing human care agreement with RSA for supported employment, but did not have employment, did not have job readiness, they are able to add job readiness to the human care agreement without the provider. I believe the provider doesn't have to do anything, that the Office of Contracts and Procurement is just adding that line, because if someone is qualified as an employment readiness provider under the waiver, then they are qualified as a job readiness provider for RSA. For those providers who don't yet have a human care agreement, the solicitation is open, and it will be open until the 28th of this month. You should contact OCP about, go online to respond to that solicitation, because what needs to be submitted is minimal. So, please don't go in and fill out a whole big application. That's not necessary. But if there are questions when you log in about what to provide, please ask OCP before you spend too much time, because all that you need to do is provide evidence that you're currently an employment readiness provider and qualified, and you're interested in being a job readiness provider for RSA. I would say job readiness, supported employment, and discovery. And in reviewing the rules around employment readiness and job readiness, what I noticed was that employment readiness in the waiver is a bit broader in scope than job readiness. And so one of the things we're going to make sure and do is sit down and talk everything through well with our VR counselors to make sure they know what all of the options in VR are, so that we align well with the existing services in the waiver that the person may have been receiving, because some people could get discovery as a service. Discovery for RSA is a purely milestone-based service. It's not an hourly service. You get paid for developing a plan, and so those issues can be discussed at the IDT meeting. One thing to keep in mind: the reason that we implemented the 2-year limit for employment readiness in the waiver is that the goal of employment readiness is to obtain employment, not to engage in years and years and years of discussion about different skills necessary to work. As the former deputy for RSA, my position there was the best employment readiness training is a job, because that's where you learn the skills to do well on a job. The best place to learn appropriate workplace etiquette oftentimes is in the workplace. It happens that some people learn, actually all of us learn, through our own failures, much more than we learn through our successes or from someone else telling us about possible failures. And so, one of the things that I just want to emphasize strongly is that RSA is going to be very focused on what are you teaching them and how is this headed toward employment, because that is the goal. The goal is not to spend a year getting job readiness services from RSA as a way to spend time with the person. Now, the purpose of RSA engaging in this is that providers had expressed an interest in being able to do job readiness supports remotely. And as I had indicated before, if they're doing it remotely and a person is in a residential placement, then they're probably getting a waiver service paid at that time, and we can't pay 2 waiver services at the same time. And so, this is a way that we could pay through RSA for the waiver service, for the job readiness service that occurs at the placement. If services are going to occur on site, off site from the residents, then those kinds of services could probably be funded through the waiver. I do think we have to be very cautious. One of the things you'll see in all the different guidance from DC Health is a real emphasis on limiting the number of people that anyone we support interacts with, because you limit the possibility of contracting something from another person. And that is especially true for people who are at higher risk of serious outcomes from COVID. I do see that there is a question about whether, there's actually a lot of questions. So I'll go ahead and ask Crystal if you could address whatever the questions are that we were Wednesday, and then we can move to the questions in the chat box.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Has the Appendix K with the final rates for companion care been received from CMS? Has that been approved?
Not yet. We received what we hope are our final questions Wednesday, I believe, Wednesday or Thursday morning, but we answered all of those yesterday, so we are hoping to hear soon.
Okay. And I believe this next question is in regards to the CPAC. Will the meeting with the team, in paren, service coordinator, person, and DSP, be held after the form has been filled out?
That is the process. And so for people that want sort of a refresher on that, the PowerPoint that was used at the training on the community participation assessment and questionnaire process is on our website. And there's an additional attachment there that shows what the process is. And so the process is that, whoever's in the best position to complete the assessment does that. Once that is done, that is committed to MCIS. And from there, the service coordinator then schedules an interdisciplinary team meeting.
Is DC Health on this call today? Can they address questions regarding the new ICF Phase 2 guidance from stakeholders other than the providers they are meeting with this afternoon?
So I know that DC Health is preparing for their meeting at 1 o'clock, but I don't know if they are here and available to answer questions.
Hi, good afternoon. Daryl Hawkins from DC Health is here with the EPI team. Can you hear me?
Great. Yes.
Hi.
So they are here and available for questions. So put them in the chat box. I also see a question about the training, the PowerPoint that Michael Siegelman does on it was on PPE and prevention. Is that going to be put on our website, and when? So I'm asking the question now because I don't know the answer. Kirk or Winslow, can you answer that?
I do not have any information at this time, but I will follow up.
Because I assume it's complete. He did the training this past Monday.
Correct. He's finalizing another version for external stakeholders. So we'll have more information as to when that will be available, but he is finalizing it.
Thank you. So Daryl Hawkins from DC Health is available to respond to any questions about the ICF Phase 2 guidance.
Were there any questions for Daryl Hawkins for DC Health? Okay, so the ICF, this question is for Daryl Hawkins. The ICF Phase 2 guidance reads like a very institutional document with reference to field trips and communal dining. ICFs in DC are more community-based than in other jurisdictions with 3 to 4 people. What is the justification for stricter visitation in ICFs?
Hi, thank you for that question. This is Daryl Hawkins from DC Health. So part of the reason why the ICF document, although not slight, there's a couple of differences between that and CRFs and supported living, and that's because from our understanding, there are some individuals in ICFs that have higher acuity or more complex medical issues. But in addition, in the beginning of the outbreak, we did see some higher case fatality rates. We do understand that the ICFs are more like home settings, and we did take that into consideration. However, I can certainly bring up your comment and concern to my team, and obviously guidance always gets updated with input from the community, so I appreciate it, and hopefully that helps answer your question.
Is there a
If
way?
I can just supplement to that, just to say, not only the risk of, not only the person who's being visited, but the other people in the home. And so, the concern about having someone come in from outside, even if you say, well, my family member is not at higher risk, they may live with people who are at higher risk. And as I said, in the last couple of weeks, and it's in some respects, because we've had some of these discussions with DC Health. The timing wasn't great, quite frankly, to have them because we saw 3 outbreaks in ICFs over the last couple of weeks.
Is there any way possible that DSPs could be expedited for testing?
And to add to that, there's also a question that followed up says, maybe through an MOU with USPHS or the Guard?
Dr. Nesbitt is saying that right now, on average, the results for the DC public health sites are coming back in 3 days on average. I have reached out to her to get some guidance on how we implement this. So we'll communicate that suggestion as well. I mean, because like I said, you are talking about regular testing of over 1,000 people in over 50 different locations. So there's a real challenge in the logistics, not only of getting it done, but then of getting the results. So we'll make sure and include that in our discussion with them.
How does DDS plan to address the capacity of RSA counselors, and how can providers help facilitate this? I foresee problems with timeliness, coordination, etc.
Well, I said before, we are meeting, we're talking about a small pool of either 3 or 4 counselors. So being able to provide them the training that they need to make sure that they have the knowledge, the skill, and the time to address this. It's a smaller target of people that will require that training, and so I've asked Daryl to make sure that they get this training so that they're well prepared to be the expert on these different services when they go to the interdisciplinary team meetings. And just so people know, I when this came out, I also looked at some of our data, and when in support of what Ms. Hawkins was saying regarding the fatality rate amongst people in ICFs, if you look at the number who had died in ICFs, which is high, but also just looking at the percentage of deaths by the placement type, which is almost 5%, and the percentage of death by those who were infected. There were in our ICFs to date, 16% of the people who contracted COVID in ICFs have died. And almost it's 4.68% of people in ICFs have died from COVID. And so it is a far higher percentage than the other placement types that we have in terms of this really significant outcome.
Where do we find the ICF guidance?
At coronavirus.dc.gov, under phase 2, you scroll down, and there's a whole list of, when you open up coronavirus.dc.gov, it's got phase 2, and then it's got the most recent information, about the mayor's order that required people visiting to or visiting from a variety of states to self-quarantine. Below that are the mayor's order, and then the phase 2 guidance, and that is mostly in alphabetical order, and you'll find intermediate care facilities there in alphabetical order and about the middle of the list. And you will also find there the guidance on health guidance for adult day programs, which is at the right near the very top, not in alphabetical order, and the guidance for supported living and community residence facilities, almost at the bottom of that same list.
Okay. Regarding testing in DC, will the testing be done through the public health lab? Will this continue to be a free resource ongoing, or will this eventually be fee-based service?
It continues to be a service that they provide to us at no charge. And Winslow, maybe you have an update. In a meeting that I had that involved the public health lab and looking at their budget through, I thought it was June of 2021, I didn't see that there was any expectation that would be any different between now and the end of June 2021.
Director Reese, I do not have an update, but I will follow up on that issue.
In regards to job readiness for waiver at RSA, will this be job readiness 1 or job readiness 2 that RSA is providing?
It could be either, keeping in mind that job readiness, it will be, for the most part, it will be job readiness 1, which is group job readiness. The only time that we would be authorizing job readiness 2 would be in circumstances, job readiness 2 is intended to be in circumstances where a person is has developed these skills, and it's sort of a transition into the workplace where they need individualized assistance with implementing those skills. It's very much akin to job coaching. And so job readiness 2 could be provided in that instance.
Okay. And how does RSA fit with out-of-state providers nowhere near DC? We have a relationship with local VR. Not sure how RSA fits in our employment services.
Yeah, that's a good question. So where is this person from? Because the vocational rehabilitation services for folks who are not close by should really be provided by that local VR program. Now,
Eastern Shore, Maryland.
yeah, I mean, I'd have to ponder that some, because if you're talking about doing job readiness remotely for people who are there, I don't see that that's a problem, because they're a DDA client, they qualify for services with us. And the idea with the remote job readiness is that you're doing essentially a job readiness group. So you would have to have the technology for people to participate. And likely you would have to have residential staff there who can help the person participate in many instances, or at least be available to help with any technology issues as they engage in whatever the activity is. So, I guess it depends on who the provider is that's doing it, but it doesn't seem that challenging. Now, so it depends on, I guess, like if the provider was deciding to do job readiness on their own site and they were a qualified employment readiness provider, they could do that and just not do the companion service during the day, and bill for employment readiness for everyone. So they're kind of individual questions, but I don't think, given that it's a remote service, that that's a bar to someone who's pretty far away from participating, because you're participating in this call.
Any additional questions? Please type it in the chat box. We have staff and technology, just don't want to jump through hoops with RSA if we're covered. So that was an added comment.
I'm confused though when you say you don't want to jump through hoops if you're covered. It seems like you would have to jump through hoops to be covered, but so if you could explain. But it might also be an individual question. You could, Daryl Evans is the deputy for RSA. That's 442-8606. And he may be able to assist you with a specific question like that.
Okay, any additional questions? Job Readiness 2 seems to max out at 90 days. Will this be extended by RSA during the pandemic?
I doubt it. And the reason I say that is that, as I was saying, Job Readiness 2 is very similar to job coaching. You know, if you look at the definition, it's about someone who has developed the skills and needs assistance in transitioning into an employment setting with those skills. And so, you know, most likely, if a person is transitioning into an employment setting, there's no reason that we wouldn't do job coaching and be using supported employment dollars rather than general VR dollars.
Will RSA also waive the requirement that the provider must pay for wages of the person in the transitional work experience?
If you're talking about engaging in a transitional work experience, you have to have a conversation with the VR counselor about how that's going to work. And there isn't, you know, for our VR services, there isn't any kind of appendix K like there is for our waiver. And so, you know, we have whatever flexibility we have in the existing rules.
Additional comments, Job Readiness 2 requires the provider to pay for the wages, and transitional work experience is Job Readiness 2.
Correct.
Just wanted to get clarification if there will be any modifications in this process since waiver is being applied to these RSA services.
Waiver is not being applied to these RSA services. When providers came to us and said, providers who are doing employment readiness said, you know, we could begin doing remote employment readiness services. We'd like to do that for people who are not going to come in to our place, to their facility. That was where we said, you know, the challenge with that is that you can't bill two waiver services at the same time. And so let's see if we could, rather than have the employment readiness be provided through the waiver, we would then do a referral and have job readiness be provided through RSA. You can go to the regulations under dcreg.dc.gov and look at the RSA regulations as well as the DDA regulations and the definitions of the two different services. They're very similar. And so that's the reason we feel that we could do this through RSA.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes. In terms of the ICF guidance, what is the reasoning for allowing people who do non-medical services like a barber into the home, but not a parent? Is Daryl Hawkins still with us?
She may be already logging on to the other.
Yeah.
I can say part of it is that some of these services were traditionally offered in the homes, for one. When I spoke to ICF providers, some of them said they do have people who come in and do it, so they were already coming. Of course, visits were already occurring as well. A visit can occur outside. And if you look at the guidance regarding personal care, I think the preference there is that it occur outside as well. There did seem to be, from my perspective, sort of a lot of guidance regarding personal care services for people in ICFs as compared to other kinds of activities, which I found interesting.
Okay, any additional questions? Another comment, Director Reese. So if I'm a residential provider and also provide job readiness, I will be able to bill for both services simultaneously.
Correct. It's not it's not the provider being able to bill for both services. It is that a person cannot receive two Medicaid services at the same time. And so, two providers, one who's paying for companion services and one who's providing companion services and one who's providing job readiness through VR can both get paid at the same time because they're not both Medicaid based. They're not both being billed to Medicaid. And this is something we've done in the past as well, where we've had providers in the waiver providing individualized day services to supplement job development supported employment. So I see we are about out of time. I know that we have folks who are going to be shifting into another call in 1 minute. And I also have a cabinet meeting in 1 minute. So thank you for your questions. Thanks for your continued support for the people that RSA and DDA serve. And we will talk again next week.
Thanks, everyone.